Sundays, we've watched Jesus grow up. First, from the child who returned to Nazareth with Mary and Joseph from their sanctuary years when they were refugees in Egypt, to that precocious 12-year-old who confronted the priests and the teachers in the Jerusalem temple. We've seen a little boy, Jesus, become a young man. Jesus has discovered what he's meant to do. Jesus has come of age. He's got the call. He's ready to do. But now that Jesus has realized the task for which God has sent him into the world, namely to tell the people about God, to show them who God really is, to bring them to God's love apart from the stifling rituals and rules of their religion, Jesus still has a problem. When should he begin? If Jesus begins his ministry too soon, say at age 13, he will have neither the acceptable gravitas of adulthood nor the necessary preparation in life for such a task. But then if Jesus waits too long, he may never begin at all. Isn't that something that we all have to confront? When is the right time to start something new? Having experienced in the temple during that Passover when he was 12 years old what God was calling him to do, Jesus still had to await the right time to set out on his saving work. Jesus was 12 years old when the revelation came to him regarding what he should do, but he was 30 years old when he actually began his work. Well, that leaves a gap of 18 years. 18 years is a long time for somebody to wait before launching out into the world with their chosen vocation. And because there are no records in the Gospels about what Jesus did during those 18 missing years, those 18 silent years, a great deal of speculation has tried to fill in the gap. There are those who say Jesus went with John the Baptist, his cousin, into the wilderness, perhaps to the Essene community in Qumran near the Dead Sea, learning an alternative theology to what was taught and performed in the temple, a radical form of righteousness, a militant eschatology. There are others who say that Jesus traveled to India to learn a Hindu spirituality, to meet with followers of the Buddha. 18 years of instruction in Eastern yoga and meditation and self-emptying disciplines would certainly have softened Jesus' Jewishness and his call to social activism. The Latter-day Saints accept Joseph Smith's idea that Jesus actually came to America and ministered among the Native American Indian tribes. They refer to them as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. We call them Ojibwa and all the rest. In other words, there's no limit to the kinds of speculation about what Jesus did during those unrecorded 18 years of life between age 12 and age 30. But frankly, I think it's much more likely that Jesus' real experiences were far less esoteric and revolutionary than any of those great speculations. I suspect those 18 unrecorded years were spent close to home, in preparation for the task that Jesus felt called to do. He was paying attention to the details of home life and village life and social relationships. I think Jesus was learning the basic knowledge and skills that would equip him for his calling, as must we all, right? As we heard 2 weeks ago from Luke, we were told that Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature. He learned to read, for example, because the day would come when Jesus would be invited to read the scriptures from the prophet Isaiah and to comment upon it. We'll hear about that in another week or two. There was a village school in Nazareth to which Jesus would have gone. And in that school, there was a rabbi, a teacher, or two, whose names we will never know because it was unrecorded. But they taught the Son of God about the law and the prophets and the writings in the Bible. I just want to say that there are many teachers who are doing a work far greater than she or he even realizes when we remember that Jesus had teachers. So thank you, teachers. He was also learning to do a good day's work. For as this morning's scripture reading points out, Jesus was primarily known as a carpenter in Nazareth. Long ago, the church father Justin Martyr wrote, and I quote, "Jesus was in the habit of working as a carpenter when he was among men, making plows and yokes," unquote. There's an old legend that Jesus of Nazareth was known for making the best oxen yokes in all of Galilee. People came from far and wide to buy the yokes that Joseph and Jesus made. And when Jesus said later, "My yoke is easy," the word that he used in Greek, Christos, actually means well-fitting. So it's possible that the sign that was above Jesus and Joseph's carpenter shop may have been an oxen yoke with the slogan painted on it, "My yokes fit well." When Jesus came to his synagogue, his church in Nazareth, the members looked at one another as he spoke. "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary and Joseph?" And then they named Jesus' 4 brothers and his sisters, shaking their heads all the while. Mark tells us they took offense at him. And I suppose it could be because they knew Jesus too well. They knew who he was, warts and all, this Jesus of Nazareth. He had, after all, grown up there for 30 years. So that was them. But what do we know about him? We who have heard about his birth, right? His birth in a barn in Bethlehem. We heard about his flight into Egypt as an asylum-seeking refugee from King Herod. And eventually we heard how he settled in Nazareth, where Joseph, Jesus' father, was a worker, a tekton in Greek, a man who made things with his hands, a manual laborer, a carpenter. This much we know. But let me tell you something more about this carpenter business. As I said, the Greek word for Joseph's profession, one that Jesus apparently also followed for 30 years, is tekton, and it's usually rendered into English as carpenter, implying a lowly place in our contemporary society, right? A common laborer, a construction worker. In preparation for today's sermon, I went back to my faithful Anchor Bible Commentary. My Anchor Bible Commentary on Mark. Definitive, right? Seminary grade. Where the word tekton is rendered craftsman. The Greek word has a wide range of meaning, writes Christopher Stephen Mann in his huge book about Mark. It means anything from shipbuilding to sculptor, but nearly always implies a person of considerable skill, and it even can be used for a physician. Anyone who uses their hands to produce a beneficial improvement is a tekton. So far from being a simple village carpenter, engaged in making plows and yokes, which any peasant of his time could also be capable of producing, Joseph may well have been a builder of some competence, traveling over large areas of the country, including assisting in the restoration of the old capital city of Galilee, Sepphoris, which was only 5 miles from Nazareth. William Barclay, the late great preacher, Bible teacher from Glasgow, Scotland, whose daily study Bible series is my absolute favorite resource in any of these studies. He writes, and I quote, "A tekton was more than a carpenter. He was a craftsman who could build a wall or a house, construct a boat, or make a table or a chair, or throw a bridge across a little stream. They could turn their hands to any job. In their hands, wood and metal and stones became obedient, and such was Jesus. Jesus could never have lived the life he did had he not been physically equipped for it. In those days, a carpenter did not buy his wood from the sawmill or from the Home Depot, the warehouse. He went out to the hillside, chose a tree, swung an axe, cut it down, carried it home on his shoulder. Certainly, Jesus was no weak and anemic person. He must have been bronzed and weather-beaten," unquote. The Aramaic word nagara, which would have been a tekton in Greek, is a nagara in the local dialect. also ranged in meanings. It could be a maker of furniture or a builder of buildings, with all the associated skills in between. And such skilled craftsmen were itinerants, which simply means they were ready to move wherever the next building project was. And this reality for the tekton, unlike the farmers, or unlike the people who are in settled merchants, the random mobility of the carpenter's trade made it likely that Jesus had been out of town working for many of those 18 unrecorded years. He would not be immediately recognized when he came back home to Nazareth. And the town of Nazareth was a hub of itinerant workers passing through. There were immigrants and migrants. There were day laborers and aliens, sojourners, merchants, traders, all passing through. So even though Joseph and Mary had located their family home in Nazareth, the work of a carpenter, a tekton, a nagara, a handcrafter would have meant that Jesus spent little time actually among his neighbors in the town because he was a day laborer. Galilee itself was very well situated for an itinerant craftsman. If you settle your family in Nazareth, you could easily travel to the coastal cities on the Mediterranean to the west, and to the towns along the shores of the Sea of Galilee to the east. And this morning's reading that Jay Kettler shared with us began by saying Jesus came to his own country, which is the Galilee region of Israel, to the town of Nazareth where he had grown up. When I read that, I thought I could guess that could be kind of like me, coming back to Alpena after 40 years away, ready to preach in my hometown, to my own kinfolk, in my own home. Except that Jesus was only 30 years old at the time, not 64 like me. And he had not been on the road for his disciples for decades like Patty and me, but rather only for a few months at the most.